turning. Something's happening.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Excellent, excellent. So this is Stephen R. of Zygote on the Architects and Heroes Livestream podcast, and I am here with a very old and dear friend to Architects and Heroes, Riz Maslen. How are you, Riz?
I'm good. I'm really good. Better than I thought I would be, considering what's going on.
No kidding. It's the first one of these that I did was with Miguel from Single Cell Orchestra, and we started the whole thing with our COVID masks on, and it was very on plague brand. So there's so much to unpack here, and I'd like to start with just talking to you a little bit about, obviously the conditions right now are super odd, and with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that's been going on in that world. But for you creatively, outside, let's kind of, when it was a simpler time 3 months ago, before the pandemic was in full swing, what's going on in your world musically right now?
I've just finished an album that's about what has been released digitally, but it is coming out on vinyl through Jeff Barrow's label, Invada. It's a film soundtrack, because they've been releasing lots of film soundtracks, and it's been working with another composer, or another friend of mine actually, collaborator, Oliver Scherer, and the filmmaker is Andrew Cotting, and he's released a film called The Whalebone Box. And we remixed the soundtrack, myself and Ollie split the tracks, and we did, I think, 8 each. And it's going to be a double vinyl boxed, beautifully crafted box set that Andrew's actually made. But because literally before the vinyl was being pressed, I think it was in Czechoslovakia, and literally the week we were going to get it back, this all kicked off. So we never got the vinyl. So hopefully it should be happening soon, and then we'll have the lovely vinyl. But you can download it on their Bandcamp website.
That's really exciting. That's excellent. Talk to me a little bit about how you got into. You said you had worked on multiple film soundtracks, right?
Yes.
Talk to me a little bit about kind of how that process has evolved for you, because I know that there's always been a very visual component to the work that you've done, and you have worked in film directly yourself as well. Can you talk to me a little bit about how that's evolved along with your music?
I think I've worked a lot with a really interesting female writer-director called Melanie Poole, and we've done a lot of short films together for probably over 10 years. And from that, it kind of gave me the opportunity to look possibly into working with other filmmakers. And actually, a lot of it's just happened, falling into my lap. It's not like I've gone out and looked for it. And both Melanie and I worked on a film a couple of years ago that won quite a lot of awards. And I was very lucky to win a composer award for the soundtrack of the film. And off the back of that, we're continuing our relationship because we have such an interesting way of looking at the world together. Her visual kind of eye really works with the music that I create, and we kind of trust each other in what we do. And I think that's a very unique relationship. And through that, and through working with her, other little things have fallen into my lap. Not kind of big, epic, Hollywood films, as we'd all like to do. But working with someone like Andrew, who's a very well-respected, I guess you'd call him very much an art house filmmaker. I don't know if anybody out there would have seen a film called Bait, which is also quite an interesting film. And also the guy who directed Bait is a big fan of Andrew. And that's how Invada got involved, because they'd already released the soundtrack of the film Bait. And then Andrew obviously approached them, and they very nicely said they would release it. So a lot of it's just happened sheerly by luck, I think, more than anything, as is everything in the world. Yeah.
On the film side, it seems like, I have seen your filmography around Dish and Remote Control and Murder in Paradise, and you've got a few more as well there. And you know, the work that you're doing in film, it sounds like has it all been on the soundtrack side? Or are you also involved in the production side? Because I find that really fascinating.
I always made my own kind of, I guess you'd call them handmade films, or and in the early days I was introduced to Super 8, which is a really kind of old school way of making. I mean, it's using film, as in now everybody's using digital, and I still really enjoy working with film. It's not as easy now to get it processed, but for me in the beginning, I used to just go around with a wind up Super 8 camera, so it was brilliant. So it wasn't reliant on batteries. I just wound it up, and then I'd shoot. A lot of the time you wouldn't know what you would get back because you'd send the film away and get it back. So there was that kind of excitement of not knowing what you're going to get. Mm-hmm. So it just, I think when I was signed to Ninja, it kind of just made it, for me, it just seemed to work really well to have kind of visual element that maybe I could project, maybe use it as a way of kind of on another platform and maybe get people interested that way. And I've always loved film. I think film for me has always been very much an inspiration to my own music work. So I think it lends itself that I, have this other string to my bow, which is very DIY. It's not something that I would consider I'm an expert at. I'm just somebody who likes working with the image, the visual image. So, but much of my filmmaking is very experimental as opposed to, doing something that, I wouldn't know what to do about, writing a drama or something like that. I'll leave that to the experts.
Well, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the most important films are art house films, right? So I have been sort of on this, going back and watching the works of Jean-Luc Godard and looking at some of the more, groundbreaking filmmakers that have come out. And there always is that element of, I don't know, it's almost like you have to continually push boundaries, I think, to find a good way to express certain ideas. And, what I've always loved about your body of work has been that you do not tie yourself to a genre per se, right? You always seem to be kind of pushing out in different directions and trying new things and experimenting with different ideas and concepts. And, I going back and listening to sort of the earlier Neotropic stuff, and then the Small Fish with Spine work, and then you've run the range of rave, dance, experimental, acoustic. Like it runs the gamut from vocals to no vocals to could you talk a little bit about kind of your experience? Talk to me a little bit about The Beloved too, because I'm very interested in your Beloved. Because I for some reason that was not on my radar, and I was going through your bio. I'm like, wait a minute, what? I had no idea. To talk about that a little bit, and then kind of your evolution as an artist to where we get to today with your work.
Yeah, The Beloved really came about working with Paul Jason Fredericks, who did a lot of the kind of live performances, and I think he sang on the records and stuff like that. And they were looking for a female keyboard player to do performances and stuff. So he just kind of said, "Oh, I've got this friend, Riz, she'll do it," And I was a bit like, "Really?" and it just seemed, I just kind of ended up doing it. And they were John and Helena were the most loveliest people to work with. They were so laid back. The rest of the group were amazing. We had such a good time. I mean, we really did have a laugh. And that, for me, just sums it up. Doing a job you love doing, but with really nice people.
Yeah, and that's pretty amazing, because The Beloved FSOL. Let's talk about that for a minute. Tell me a little bit about that experience for you.
Well, I met Brian and Gary because I used to kind of hang out in a studio in Dollis Hill, also where For Hero were. And it was also a rehearsal studio. So you used to get people like Suede coming in and playing. So a lot of the kind of indie bands of that time.
Right.
This was obviously in the mid-90s. So I ended up making a cup of tea or something. And someone said, "Oh, the guy from Humanoids moved in." And I'm like, "Humanoid?" So I went down and I said, "Are you the guy that made Humanoid? That acid track?" And I was a bit naive, and he said, yeah. And I said, "Oh, can I come and have a look in your studio?" And I was just completely blown away, because I'd been sort of hanging out with another person, Hamish MacDonald, he'd worked with Wee Papa Girl Rappers. So he was a really, you know, well-established producer, and I was kind of learning the ropes of how to use an MPC 60, a sampler, just hanging out and maybe doing a few vocals for him. So to then suddenly meet the guy I'd written like Stack of Humanoid was just like, wow. So looking in their studio kind of inspired me, because they were quite guerrilla in the way that they worked, and I kind of liked that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it was about using samples, kind of creating almost like piecing together different things, almost like making a film in some ways, you know, working in that way. Well, grab bits of this, grab bits of that, and then play stuff on top. And so for me, it was just really inspiring, because I'm not really a musician. I'm a bit of a cut and paste person, you know.
Well, it's for someone who's not a musician, you've put out quite a few records.
Yeah, I think I've been very lucky, you know.
Has it been the process really that it was the electronic music kind of model of using samples and sort of the I guess, you know, as you described it, the cut and paste model, and sort of approaching it that way, and that really kind of drew you to that, or was it, because I know a lot of your music that I've heard in recent years, it's very different, it's very melodic, it's very it's most definitely musician forward. It definitely, you know, has that quality to it. And how did you get from sort of the cut and paste to kind of this kind of full, almost like full band, right? Is your current
what I tend to do, and I think this has been the transition, is that I did actually train as a classical flute player. So I did have a foundation of reading music, but I never really pursued it. I kind of got a bit fed up with, it was a bit boring and a bit dry, and I wanted to do something that was a bit more kind of interesting. So in the early days, I started out in a band with my sister. We were really bad. I mean, really bad. But she was actually a really good drummer. So we were in a few weird bands that did quite well. We were a little bit alternative.
Yeah.
And then I started working with another person who was using a lot of tapes, like using reel-to-reel tapes live. So he would record everything, and then we'd go and play live with, you know, an 8-track tape, which was brilliant. And it was such an inspiration to work with somebody who was really kind of pushing the boundaries. So for me, I'd always wanted to do it, but I don't think I had the knowledge or enough of the equipment to do it. So bowling up and working in Dollis Hill and Jumbo Studios and meeting all the other people who were at that time, at the kind of beginning of that whole scene, like Mark from For Hero, Digo from For Hero, and even, you know, Goldie would pop in every now and then and stuff like that. It was a really good time to be around, because there was so much going on. And I think it just really inspired me to think that these people were making really interesting music that I could go and listen to in a really nice club, or a, you know, dark, dodgy kind of rave in Lee Bridge Road or something. But it was perfect. It was a perfect antidote to everything else that was going on, because I was a bit bored of, you know, I never really liked pop music. I might have done when I was younger, but I wanted to do something that was a little bit more interesting and push the boundaries. So working with people like Brian and Gary from Future Sound really opened my eyes to kind of trying to put down what's going on up here using your machine, which was perfect for me, because I could play, but really badly. But this way, I could kind of sample myself and then kind of chop it up and then kind of put it within the arrangement. So it's kind of weird how it's come full circle, because now I'm much more led by playing stuff. I'm still not the best player in the world, and I will get friends in. I'll write string parts and I'll get people to come in and play them. So I'm very lucky that I have the facility. I can bring people in and say, you know, it's in this key, pretty much do what you want, but, you know, and I do give people a free rein to kind of interpret in their own way, because I like that. I like them to have, I want them to have their own personality. You know, I just give them a guide. So
it sounds like collaboration is pretty essential to your work.
It is now. I mean, for me, I really love working alongside other musicians, and it's given me a lot of joy. It's given me lots of amazing friendships with people who I just love working with, because it's just so easy. I mean, I've worked with people in the past where it's not been that great, And it was a real revelation when I left London and came to live on the southeast coast, that I met a whole bunch of people and we just clicked. And it gave me the opportunity to work with those people and learn from each other. And that was the brilliant thing. We kind of shared our skill set and it really worked. And now we work with each other all the time. If I need someone to come and play guitar, I'll just ring up Ollie and say, Ollie, can you just come and drop and play guitar? Or I just actually send it to him. And then 2 hours later, he'll send it back. So it's a perfect relationship in that respect.
And you and Ollie are collaborating with some regularity now, it sounds like.
Yeah, well, he plays on my albums. I play on his albums. We often gig together. So it's just the perfect setup. And there are two other people I work with. There's Jack Hayter and also a guy called Darren Morris. So the four of us have our own little kind of, everyone calls it a super group, but I don't. It's an improvised kind of group that we've been doing lots of reinterpretation of films, but we do it live, we improvise it. And that for me has been a joy to kind of go and play music when you don't really know what you're going to play at the beginning of the night. But we seem to have this very special relationship with one another, which is very rare, especially when you're improvising, because not everybody can do that. It's about listening and space, and we listen to hear what one person's playing, and then we know what to do almost. It's a very, I can't sort of say it in words how amazing that is to be able to do that with three other musicians. It's fantastic.
That's a really, the improvisation is such a radically different composition model and performance model than the creation of sort of the like you had referred to the cut and paste electronic music that you had been working on. What was the, I guess, the jumping off point for you when you went from primarily working in sort of the electronic music space to working more of in that improvised world?
I think when I did La Prochaine Fois, I think that's when things started to change for me. I think I've been listening to a lot more different music. I wasn't so kind of deeply entrenched in the kind of hip hop down tempo, which I still love, and I still listen to that music, and electronic. I wanted to kind of bring in other influences, and I think that's what allowed me to be a lot more open. And a lot of the stuff on there, like the flute and stuff, was often improvised anyway. So I would just play freely over something. And then I would probably sit down and maybe shuffle it around, or maybe just go in and correct something, or I'd just leave it. Sometimes I'd just play something and I'd leave it in there. So I think I'd always wanted to do that, but maybe never had the confidence. I think you have your peer group and the people you look up to. So you often want to kind of not necessarily fit, but there is that kind of, you've learned from those people. So that's what you know at that time. But then sometimes you've got to step out on your own. And I think during that time, I really started to discover who I was and what I really felt needed to be explored. And I think that's when this all started to happen.
That's a really, really interesting transition to happen, because so many, especially, you achieved a lot of success early on, and sometimes there's this tendency to want to repeat what you've done in order to maintain that level of success, or to, basically stay in your lane so you can, be more marketable. And it's such a risk for artists to go and to do things that are maybe more true to what they want to do, pushing boundaries the way that they want to push those boundaries. And it's very, it's a big step. It's a big step to be able to do that and to really find yourself in that way. And, your back catalog is just filled with amazing records. The proliferation of your work is great. And when you were doing, recording as Neotropic and then recording as Small Fish with Spine, what was the delineation between those two projects in your mind?
Well, I'd been in New York, and I'd met up with Andy Scher, who set up Oxygen Music Works, and I really wanted to do another project, and I wanted to do something kind of maybe a little bit more aggressive, not so kind of melodic, perhaps. And Andy just gave me that opportunity to do that. And I really loved his energy. And also, you know, he was working with some really interesting artists, and he was a small independent label, and it just gave me the opportunity to put something out that maybe wasn't, that allowed me to be, maybe explore another side of myself. And that's why I did that. And it was a very short-lived kind of entity, but while it existed, I really enjoyed making that music. And I think, like everything, some things maybe have a shorter shelf life, other things can continue. I think Neotropic was always my baby.
Mm-hmm.
Small Fish Was Fine was like the bastard child that kind of came and then disappeared, which was great. I kind of like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And actually, Andy is actually, I spoke to him the other day, weirdly enough, and he's actually going to, he's actually putting all the catalogue up online. So for people who want to go and discover that music, I'll try and find out where it is, because I haven't had the opportunity to ask him, because he contacted me a few weeks ago to ask if it would be okay. And I said, yeah, go for it, you know.
Oh, that's excellent.
So, you know, Curtis Mantronic did some tracks on that, on Oxton Music Works. And to meet someone like Curtis, who was like, you know, I'm not worthy, and he was just a lovely guy as well. So it was a really good time. I really enjoyed that time.
Did you do a remix of Mantronic? You did.
I did.
Yeah. Yeah. That's just epic. That is.
I know.
I mean, it's wow. That's amazing. You know, you have been kind of involved in and out with some of the most some of the biggest names in the genre of electronic music, and you know, but first and foremost, you've always really stood out as your own entity and kind of doing things in a very particular way. Even, you know, back when you're with your early material, it was always like you knew it was a Neotropic record, right? Like there wasn't there, you knew that there was a certain amount of experimentation that was going to be part of it, and it was just so uniquely yours. I mean, you could definitely hear influences of where you were at the time. I mean, because I mean, you can't not be around that sort of epic type of scene and not have that to some extent. But you know, it's been really cool to see the arc of what you've done creatively and how it's moved. It's almost you've been doing a lot of work with art galleries. Am I mistaken in that, or you've been working in a gallery setting?
I've done installations. I've done some really nice installations that I've really loved working on, and it's just been another opportunity for me to explore ways of expressing myself that work within a particular space. And I am very much about looking at spaces and how that works and how sound works in that respect. And I think I've been given some amazing opportunities where I've been allowed to kind of go in and set something up that is kind of a reflection of me, and that's often quite personal as well, you know. And I love doing stuff like that, and they don't always come along either. But when they do, I really love the challenge of being able to create something that is almost site specific, you know, in a art setting. But it's also about bringing in people who wouldn't necessarily go to an art gallery as well. I mean, I've worked a lot with young people who are completely like, feel that they are, if they're working class, if they're of an ethnic minority, art galleries aren't even in the picture, because they feel they are not worthy, because they aren't middle class, or they're not from a family that has money. So it's about breaking down those stereotypes. So that really inspired me to think about bringing in something that isn't necessarily the norm, but maybe will encourage other people to think about that, you know, you can come from any kind of background and be creative and have your work shown in an art gallery, you know. And I think that's really important.
I think you've just hit upon some really powerful ideas there, and I've always been a fan of the thing about the whole rave thing, and the thing about you know, acid house, and it's really, to me, such an extension of the DIY culture of punk rock. Right? It's like, you're not waiting for anyone. This is what we're doing. We're not waiting on labels. We're doing it ourselves. We're doing all those things. And I think that as certain artists have you know, kind of grown up in that scene and have kind of widened their horizons. And, you know, you can look at like DJ Spooky, or you can look at some other artists that are, you know, kind of come from that world, that have kind of really integrated themselves into the art world and it's done without permission, right? And that's what I absolutely love. And, you know, with where we are right now, with the death of George Floyd, with the this sort of radical awareness of inequality that's happening, specifically in the United States, but let's be honest, it's global, right? And the combination of the pandemic and all these different things. What do you see yourself as an artist? What do you feel your responsibility is as an artist? Because I think you just tapped into something there about really making art a more egalitarian process and really opening up those parameters a little bit more. Could you maybe talk about that a little bit? Because I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of my work, as well as support, I mean, it's really difficult to make a lot of money making music. And it's very lucky when you get those breaks, you might get a little chunk of money. But what I've done a lot of is work within the communities and different types of communities with young people who feel disenfranchised, because they may be from an ethnic background, they maybe have a different way of looking at things, they may have been in trouble with the police. So it's about giving them a way of expressing themselves, but not necessarily, it doesn't matter how far they go with it. It's being able to have that confidence to go forward in life and not feel that you're any different from anybody else, and you should be allowed to have the same opportunities as everybody else. I know myself, coming also, you know, my grandmother was an immigrant, so I have experienced racism on many different levels, with my friends, directed at myself, directed at my mother. So I can really empathize with what's going on right now. And I feel it's really important that we all have a platform, you know, and it needs to be a level playing field. And I can understand people's anger. And this has just gone on and on and on for hundreds of years. And art is a way of expressing that. And we can do that. We can be given that platform. We don't have to shove it down people's throats, but it's about being present. It's about being there and saying, you know, here we are, this is what we do, accept us for that. You know, we're all unique in our own way. And I'm no politician, but I know what it's like in the music industry. It's you know, as a woman, and what I've experienced being a woman within this industry is on a parallel with anyone else that may be of a different skin color. And I think it's a really interesting thing how over these last few weeks, just watching this whole thing unfold, which has been going on since Rodney King, you know, and way beyond that, you know, before that too. And it's just, it makes me so sad that we're still in a world that tolerates this shit, you know, and it's allowed to go on, and people are being unfairly treated.
I am 100% on board with that, and I feel like it feels different this time, right? And I have been around long enough to remember Rodney King and all of the, you know, I mean, it feels like there was just a string of these police murders of Black people in the United States, and at some point, I think it was the perfect storm with everybody being quarantined, everybody being indoors, people losing their jobs, and then having civil unrest around this horrendous murder of George Floyd. And to see, you know, I in Los Angeles, it's been absolutely, it's been daily. It's still happening daily. You know, thousands of people in the streets marching and protesting and making these significant changes. And, you know, it's I feel like as a creative, it can feel somewhat trite to say, I'm going to express myself about something, but I think it's such a radical notion to say that the work that you create can open up these conversations in ways that a conversation can't sometimes. You know, the impact of the arts, I don't think can be undervalued in any way, shape, or form. And I think it's to some degree, you know, other creatives, artists, and musicians, and filmmakers, and people that create things that hold the value of equality in any way. It feels like this is almost a time to take responsibility for what you're putting out there. You know what I mean? Your current work, can you tell me about your current work? And actually have, not to completely, you know, skip topics here, but since you have been in quarantine for the COVID situation and all of the just sort of global civil unrest, how is that impacting what your process looks like?
It's really strange because I'm working on a project at the moment that's very specific, and it's really a complete departure from anything I've ever done before. It's something that I'm actually working on a musical.
Wow.
And I never in a million years thought I would ever say that. Those words would ever come out of my mouth, because it's not something I could say that I love, but there are a few films that I do love, like Cabaret and Sweet Charity, which are really groundbreaking films from a musical point of view. But the musical I'm working on is about Anglo-Indians that came to the UK in the 1960s. And it's really quite interesting because it's about them being accepted for being of Indian descent and going to live in Sheffield, which is up in the north. So it's about the journey of the young children of the family who are actually musicians, and they're actually jazz musicians. And it's based on a true story, actually, because the writer-director is one of the children of one of the people in the band. So it's a really brilliant story, and it just seems so perfect for what is going on right now. They were a little later than the Windrush generation, but they're also a kind of forgotten kind of part of our heritage, because the interracial mixture between white and Asians because my grandmother is actually Anglo-Indian. So, and a lot of the Anglo-Indians worked on the railways, and my great-grandfather worked on the railways. So it's about that too. So it's a really interesting story about how there's a whole element of Asian culture that has never really been talked about, because it's always been it's been played down a bit. So it's about also bringing those kind of stories to light. And I think this is a perfect opportunity to talk about race, but in a positive way, rather than something where people are being killed and this is actually, it's got its struggles, and there are some really interesting elements within the story, covering things like mental health and stuff like that. But I think, in a perfect world, I would love us all to live in harmony, but that's never going to happen, because there are people who want to dominate and rule, and and that's the way it goes, especially with your current government. It doesn't help when you have somebody who is just fueling the fire.
Yeah. I don't even know where to start about that. First of all, I apologize.
You don't need to apologize.
No. It is unfathomable to me that he became president. Period. I really, waking up and finding out he's president is kind of like, you could have said Ronald McDonald was president, and it would have made more sense to me. So the musical is a brand new territory for you, and I love the fact that it's a story specifically about your heritage, but it's not necessarily a story that is, for every negative, sort of violent, awful, horrific story, there are people that just live their lives and have their families too. There's just so many different facets of the experience when you come from a different place culturally, and I think that's a really interesting take on how to, I guess to be able to tell that story in a way that is a little lighter, and it's a little bit more, you know, when I think, I mean, in my head, my mind is racing at the idea of how this thing will be presented. I'm really fascinated with how that's going to work. Are you going to be performing in the show? Is that
in a theatre? Well, the problem with any musical theatre piece, a lot of these things can take up to 10 years to actually get to a theatre, because of it's a new world to me, and it's something that I mean, I've been to see theatre shows, and you just don't know what goes behind, how much work goes into these things, and how often, if you're a new writer director, how you get recognized, how do you get a theatre to actually back you and put them on. You know, it's that thing of like, always everybody wants to get to Broadway and stuff like that, and that often takes a long time.
Yeah.
And I've worked with the writer director before on another project, and she does a lot of work that's actually working with ethnic minorities and telling those kind of stories. So it's been a real pleasure to kind of then transition from doing community-based kind of theatre to now kind of working in a genre that's very competitive, and something that I never imagined doing has been a real... I'm still getting to grips with it, because it's a very particular way of writing. You're telling a story. There are certain rules which I never knew, because I'm not from a musical theatre background, and that for me has been an education. So we did an R&D last year, research and development, with a bunch of actors, singers, and we presented it to a theatre in Sheffield, the Crucible Theatre, which is a really big theatre there. And they loved the idea. So we now have gone away to develop it. We've just finished the first act, and now we're going into the next part, which is the second act. So, and then we will hopefully next year get to kind of perform it in some way or another.
That's really, really exciting. So is the plan when you're doing and writing and working with the director on the musical, is this something that is that it's collaborative, like you're coming up with lyrics and wow.
So we work together as a team. So there's myself and another composer who's from a classical jazz background. He is amazing. I mean, he's just incredible. He does a lot of arrangements for different people, and it's been a real joy to work with somebody like that, who I just am in awe of when he sits behind a piano. So it's quite interesting how our worlds have collided, and it works really well, because I'm from a very different way of writing, but it seems to really work. So as a collaborative three-piece, it's been a really interesting journey, and long it may continue, hopefully, you know. We'll see.
Yeah, and so, you know, again, you're just you continue to kind of push yourself into these different and new directions, and how has it been to I guess work within the context of sort of the musical theater model, where it's so important that the song propel a narrative. Right. I mean, which it does anyway.
Absolutely.
But in a more concrete, maybe less abstract way, where you're literally having to tell the story through song.
Yeah, it's been definitely one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, because it has really taken me out of my comfort zone. And I'm very much coming from a left of field perspective. So I've been listening to things like Hamilton, because of the way that's been presented.
I saw Hamilton in San Francisco, and
I loved it.
Really impressive. Yeah, it was really impressive.
And because the cast it's about a white man, but it's actually predominantly a black cast, and the music is predominantly, you know, R&B, hip hop, and it's set in, was it 1780 or something? So it's a really interesting way of kind of and for me, it was so inspiring to kind of listen to some music that's been created, but also telling a very interesting story of a time that I wouldn't be part of, you know. So it's very contemporary in some ways, and also, so I very much am leaning towards that kind of way of approaching it. I think will probably be somewhere in the middle because of the way that it's set in the 1960s. So it has to have that kind of that sound within it, I think, you know. But I am trying to say, let's not be too obvious, but it's not my baby and I'm not writing it. I'm just being commissioned to produce the music. So
that is a really, really interesting turn of events. And it's, you know, to say that your body of work has been diverse is an understatement. I think that's fantastic. I mean, honestly, like so many artists that I have been a fan of for so many years, sometimes tend to just try to create the same thing over and over again. And inevitably, you know, it's like without really expanding your repertoire a little bit, it just seems to get tired, you know? So I think what you're doing is just really fresh and innovative and interesting. And with the other, so tell me about, you have a new record, the new record coming out. And what's the title for that record?
So it's a reworking of a soundtrack to a film called The Whalebone Box, and you can actually stream it live on the British Film BFI website. Andrew has a whole body of work that's the BFI are huge supporters of him, and so he is very revered in his field of filmmaking. So that is already out, and you can get that on Invada's Bandcamp. Who have released some of the most amazing soundtracks. They released Debs, they've just released the Bait soundtrack, they've just done a Ben Frost thing for The Dark. Have you ever seen that on Netflix?
Oh wow, yeah, sure.
So Ben Frost did the music to that. So, you know, they're really, you know, pushing some really interesting artists who are doing some really interesting things. But it's predominantly music, well, it is all music that have been from films. By really, even Polly Harvey did the music to an adaptation of a play, and that's been released as well, which is amazing. So they're really behind that kind of sound, which is brilliant.
That's excellent. That is really great. Are you so that's been completed, that project has been completed?
Yes.
Coming out. Are you working on any new material now outside of the musical, or the musical consuming most of your
No, actually, I've just finished one. It's actually a project that's kind of ongoing. I'm working with a visual artist, Luca. He's an Italian guy, and he has a disability called hyperacusis, and it was brought on by an accident. So he has like constant tinnitus, but on top of that, he has vertigo. It makes him, he can't go out, he can't watch TV anymore. And we've just finished a project based on, he's written a lot of scientific papers, medical journals of his experiences, and we've just created an album actually based on his experiences. So I did all the music, and he has vocalized most of it actually, because it's his journey. So, and that's called Aqua Recoded, and that's the name of our project. And we're going to present, we were going to go and do lots of kind of, I guess you would call them like events where it's all about reading papers and those kind of things.
So more of a conference type thing?
Yes. Okay. Around different scientific research and stuff like that. So he's very much a pioneer in that respect. So, but because of all of this, we're not able to do any of that at the moment. So, which is a shame.
Everything you're doing is so specific and so unique. What do you have? I'm just very curious about what's coming up next. So, do you have any other projects that are in the planning stages that you're looking at right now?
Yeah, a few things that I've been working on. I'm going to do something with my friend Ollie. We've been meaning to do an album together for ages, because we seem to play on each other's albums, but we want to do something kind of specific with us. We've started working on that, but he's got an album coming out at the moment, so we're going to wait until that's all done and dusted, and then probably come back to that at the end of the year. And then, because the Benny and the Grey Cats, the musical thing, is ongoing, so that's good because I can kind of juggle that with other things, so it's fine.
That's excellent. That's excellent. Well, Riz, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate you doing
Thank you.
In your can you, if people want to find your work, we'll add links to this as well.
Yeah.
Where is your main hub online? Where can people find you?
I would just go to Bandcamp. I think Bandcamp's the best place. Slowcraft Records released my album last year, my Neotropic album. So you can download that there. And Invada on Bandcamp. And pretty much everywhere. Bandcamp's I think it's a good place, Bandcamp.
Well, once this is where we do the editing and we put this through the website too, we'll put the links, right?
Yes, fantastic. That'd be good. Yes.
Great. Well, Riz, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great rest of your evening there, and stay safe during this time. And really look forward to hearing what you have.
Oh, thank you for the invitation. It's been so long. It's lovely to talk to you.
I know. We'll have to stay in closer touch for sure.
Exactly.
We'll talk soon. Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Bye. Okay.